I never thought I'd be the type of person to orchestrate someone's professional downfall. But then again, I never thought my best friend would try to destroy my dreams either. As I sit here in my corner office, watching Sarah clean out her desk through the glass partition, I can't help but feel a twisted sense of poetic justice. She has no idea that I've known the truth for months. She has no idea that every smile I've given her, every coffee we've shared, every late-night text conversation has been carefully calculated. She thinks she's being laid off due to budget cuts. If only she knew the real reason. Let me start from the beginning, because this story, this beautiful, devastating story of betrayal and revenge, deserves to be told properly. It was 18 months ago when everything changed. I remember the exact moment because it felt like my entire world shifted on its axis. I was at my cramped studio apartment, the one with the leaky faucet and the neighbor who played music too loud, scrolling through job listings with the same desperate hope I'd carried for months. That's when I saw it. Senior Marketing Director at Pinnacle Creative Solutions, my dream company. The position I'd been working toward my entire career. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the job description. It was perfect. Too perfect. Every requirement matched my experience like it had been written specifically for me. 5 years in digital marketing? Check. Experience with campaign management and team leadership? Double check. Proficiency in analytics and creative strategy? I'd been doing that in my sleep for years. I called Sarah immediately. She was the first person I always called with good news, bad news, or anything in between. We'd been inseparable since college, the kind of friendship that people envied. She was my person, my confidant, my chosen sister. When I got the interview call back 3 days later, she was the one who helped me pick out my outfit and practiced questions with me until midnight. "You're going to nail this," she said, adjusting my blazer collar with the careful attention of a mother sending her child off to the first day of school. "Pinnacle would be lucky to have you." I believed her. I trusted her completely. The interview was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. I remember because I'd marked it in my calendar with 3 different colored pens and set 7 alarms on my phone. This wasn't just any interview. This was my shot at everything I'd been working toward. The salary was nearly double what I was making at my current job, and the company culture at Pinnacle was legendary in our industry. People stayed there for decades, building careers that others could only dream of. I spent the weekend before the interview preparing. I researched every executive, memorized their recent campaigns, and practiced my presentation until I could deliver it flawlessly, even if someone woke me from a dead sleep. Sarah came over Sunday night with Thai food and moral support, drilling me with potential questions while we ate pad Thai straight from the containers. "What's your biggest weakness?" she asked, twirling noodles around her chopsticks. I tend to be a perfectionist, which sometimes means I spend too much time refining projects when I should trust my initial instincts, I recited, the practiced answer rolling off my tongue. "Good. What about your 5-year plan?" I launched into my prepared response about wanting to grow within a company that valued innovation and creativity, about building teams that could execute groundbreaking campaigns. Sarah nodded approvingly, but I caught something in her expression, just a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. At the time, I dismissed it as concern for my nerves. Monday night, I barely slept. I kept running through worst-case scenarios in my head, then forcing myself to visualize success. I imagined walking into that sleek glass building, commanding the conference room, making them see that I was exactly what they needed. I imagined calling my parents afterward, hearing the pride in their voices. I imagined finally being able to afford a real apartment, maybe even start paying down my student loans. Tuesday morning arrived crisp and bright. I'd chosen a navy suit that made me feel powerful, paired with my lucky earrings, the ones my grandmother had given me before she died. I left my apartment an hour early, wanting to arrive with time to spare, to sit in my car and center myself before walking into the most important meeting of my career. Pinnacle's headquarters was everything I'd imagined and more. The building was a testament to modern architecture, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that seemed to invite the sky inside. The lobby buzzed with the kind of creative energy I'd been craving. People moving with purpose, laptops and portfolios in hand, the air thick with ambition and possibility. I checked in with the receptionist, a polished woman who looked like she could run her own marketing firm. She smiled warmly and directed me to the elevator bank. 23rd floor, conference room C. "Ms. Rodriguez is expecting you." My hands were steady as I pressed the elevator button, my breathing controlled. I'd done everything right. I was prepared, professional, and perfectly on time. The elevator doors opened on the 23rd floor to reveal a space that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about successful companies. The walls were lined with awards and framed campaigns, proof of the creative excellence that happened within these walls. I walked toward Conference Room C, my heels clicking confidently against the polished floors. Through the glass walls, I could see a woman with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, reviewing papers at the conference table. Maria Rodriguez, Senior Vice President of Marketing, my potential future boss. I was 5 steps away from the conference room when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. I was about to walk into the most important interview of my life, and nothing should have been able to distract me from that moment. But something made me glance down at the screen. It was a text from Sarah. "Good luck today." "You're going to kill it!" I smiled, feeling a rush of warmth for my friend's support. I was about to put the phone away when another message appeared below it. This one wasn't from Sarah. It was from someone named Marcus Chen, and it was clearly sent to the wrong number. "Interview went great. Definitely got the pinnacle job. Thanks for the tip about the marketing director position. Couldn't have done it without you." My blood went cold. I stared at the message, reading it again and again, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. Marcus Chen. I knew that name. He'd been at my previous company for about 6 months before leaving abruptly. We'd never worked closely together, but I remembered him being charming in a calculated way, the type of person who always seemed to be networking even during casual conversations. The timestamp on the message showed it was sent 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes ago, I was in my car in the parking garage, doing final preparations for my interview. 20 minutes ago, Marcus Chen was apparently finishing up his interview for the same position I was about to interview for. But that was impossible. The interview slot was mine. I had confirmed it yesterday. I had emails, calendar invitations, everything documented, unless... My hands shook as I scrolled up in the message thread. There were several messages between Marcus and whoever he thought he was texting. The conversation painted a clear picture of corporate espionage and betrayal that made my stomach lurch. Interview moved to 9:30 instead of 10. Conference room B, not C. Rodriguez likes candidates who reference her Harvard MBA and her work with sustainable marketing. They're looking for someone who can start immediately. Mention you're already giving notice at your current job. Each message was a roadmap to success, inside information that would give any candidate an unfair advantage. Information that I should have had. Information that someone had deliberately kept from me. The last message in the thread was what made everything click into place. "Thanks again for the inside scoop. Your friend Sarah really came through. Tell her I owe her dinner when I get the job." Sarah. My Sarah. My best friend Sarah had fed information to my competition and sabotaged my interview. She had helped Marcus Chen prepare for my job interview while letting me walk in blind. I stood frozen in that hallway, people moving around me like I was a statue. The sounds of the office, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, conversations buzzing, became a dull roar in my ears. My vision blurred at the edges, and for a moment I thought I might actually faint. "Ms. Parker?" A voice broke through my paralysis. I looked up to see Maria Rodriguez standing in the doorway of Conference Room C, her expression concerned. "Are you all right?" I forced my mouth to work, my voice to function. "Yes, I'm sorry. I received some unexpected news." She nodded sympathetically. "Would you like a glass of water before we begin?" Sometimes the nerves before an important interview can be overwhelming. Nerves, if only it were that simple. I followed her into the conference room, my legs moving automatically while my mind reeled. I sat across from her at the polished conference table, opened my portfolio, and somehow managed to go through the motions of the interview. I answered her questions, presented my portfolio, even managed to smile at appropriate moments. But part of me felt like I was watching everything happen from outside my body. The worst part was that I could see Marcus's coaching in action. When Rodriguez mentioned her Harvard background, I realized Marcus had known to prepare for that. When she asked about my availability, I understood why he'd been ready with the perfect answer about giving notice. Every inside tip Sarah had provided him was a landmine I stepped on unknowingly. The interview lasted 45 minutes. Rodriguez was professional and engaged, but I could feel the opportunity slipping away from me with each passing moment. How could I compete with someone who'd been given the playbook while I was left to improvise? "We'll be in touch within the week," Rodriguez said as she walked me to the elevator. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with us." I thanked her, shook her hand, and walked back to the elevator on unsteady legs. It wasn't until the doors closed and I was alone in that small, moving box that I allowed myself to fall apart. I cried during the 23-floor descent. I cried as I walked through the pristine lobby. I cried as I sat in my car in the parking garage, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. But underneath the tears, underneath the devastation and the shock, something else was growing. Something cold and calculated and furious. Sarah had betrayed me. My best friend, my chosen sister, the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world, had actively sabotaged the most important opportunity of my career. She had smiled to my face while stabbing me in the back, had practiced interview questions with me while feeding the answers to my competition. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and racing thoughts. I replayed every interaction Sarah and I had shared over the past few weeks, looking for signs I'd missed. Had she seemed different? Had there been clues I'd been too trusting to notice? I thought about Sunday night, the way she'd helped me prepare, the careful attention she'd paid to my presentation. Had she been gathering intelligence even then, making mental notes of what to share with Marcus? The thought made me physically sick. By the time I reached my apartment, the tears had stopped. In their place was a clarity I'd never experienced before. I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. I wasn't just disappointed, I was determined. Sarah thought she was clever, thought she'd outsmarted me, thought she could destroy my dreams while maintaining our friendship. She had no idea who she was dealing with. That night, I did something I'd never done before in my life. I created a detailed plan for revenge. Not the hot-blooded, impulsive kind that gets you arrested or ruins your own life. The cold, calculated, methodical kind that destroys someone slowly, piece by piece, until they're left wondering how everything fell apart. I started with research. I needed to understand exactly what Sarah had done, how she'd done it, and what her motivations were. The text messages Marcus had accidentally sent me were just the beginning. I spent hours on social media, scrolling through Sarah's posts and connections. That's when I found it. Evidence of her relationship with Marcus. Photos from company events where they were standing closer than necessary. Comments on each other's posts that seemed innocuous, but carried an undercurrent of familiarity. Likes and reactions that painted a picture of a connection I'd known nothing about. Sarah worked at a mid-level marketing firm called Apex Solutions. Not as prestigious as Pinnacle, but successful enough that she'd made decent money and maintained a comfortable lifestyle. As I dug deeper, I discovered that Marcus had worked there briefly as a consultant before moving on to his next opportunity. That's where they'd met. That's where their alliance had been formed. The more I researched, the clearer the picture became. Sarah wasn't just jealous of my career prospects. She was actively working to undermine them. The Pinnacle job wasn't the first opportunity she'd sabotaged. I found evidence of other positions I'd been interested in, other interviews that had gone mysteriously wrong, other times when my perfectly qualified applications had been met with rejection letters. She'd been systematically destroying my career for months, maybe longer, and I'd been completely oblivious. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. This wasn't a romantic relationship gone wrong or a business partnership that had soured. This was my best friend, the person who knew my deepest fears and biggest dreams, using that knowledge as a weapon against me. But if Sarah thought she'd won, she was about to learn how wrong she was. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my laptop, researching everything I could about both Sarah and Marcus. I learned about their professional histories, their current projects, their weaknesses and vulnerabilities. I studied their social media profiles like I was preparing for the most important exam of my life. By morning, I had a plan. It wasn't fully formed yet, but the outline was there, sketched in the margins of legal pads and saved in encrypted files on my computer. I was going to destroy Sarah's career the same way she'd tried to destroy mine, but I was going to be smarter about it, more patient, more thorough. The first step was damage control. I couldn't let the Pinnacle opportunity slip away completely. There had to be something I could do to salvage the situation. I spent Wednesday morning crafting the perfect follow-up email to Maria Rodriguez. I thanked her for her time, reiterated my interest in the position, and included additional portfolio pieces that I felt might be relevant to their current projects. I kept it professional but warm, confident but not presumptuous. Then I did something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I told her the truth. Not the whole truth. I wasn't ready to reveal Sarah's betrayal yet. but I mentioned that I'd become aware another candidate had been given advance information about the interview process and that I hoped she would consider whether all candidates had been evaluated under fair and equal circumstances. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The response came faster than I'd expected. Rodriguez called me directly that afternoon. "Ms. Parker?" she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I received your email, and I have to say, your allegations are quite serious." My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. "I understand that, Ms. Rodriguez. I wouldn't have brought it to your attention if I wasn't certain of my facts. I'd like to meet with you again. Tomorrow, if possible. Can you be here at 2 p.m.? I could barely contain my excitement. "Absolutely. Thank you for giving me this opportunity." After hanging up, I allowed myself one moment of pure, vindictive satisfaction. Sarah's carefully laid plans were about to backfire spectacularly, but this was just the beginning. That evening, I called Sarah. I needed to hear her voice, to see if she'd give anything away. I also needed to start laying the groundwork for the next phase of my plan. "Hey, girl," she answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "How did the interview go?" "I've been thinking about you all day." The casual lie rolled off her tongue so easily it made my skin crawl. She'd been thinking about me, all right. She'd been thinking about how successfully she'd sabotaged my future. "It went well," I said, matching her cheerful tone. "I think I made a good impression. We'll see what happens." "I'm sure you nailed it," she said, and I could hear the false enthusiasm in her voice. "When do you think you'll hear back?" They said within a week. "Hey, can I ask you something?" "Of course, anything." "Do you remember Marcus Chen from my old company? Tall guy, always wore those expensive suits." There was a pause, just a fraction of a second, but long enough to confirm what I already knew. "Vaguely," she said. "Why?" "I ran into him today after my interview. Funny coincidence. Turns out he was interviewing for the same position." Small world, right? Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, wondering how much I knew, how much I suspected. "That is weird," she finally said. "What are the odds?" "Yeah," I said, letting a note of suspicion creep into my voice. "What are the odds indeed?" We talked for a few more minutes about inconsequential things, but I could feel the tension building between us. Sarah was smart enough to realize that I was fishing for information, but she wasn't sure exactly what I knew. The uncertainty would eat at her, make her paranoid, force her to make mistakes. Thursday's meeting with Rodriguez was a revelation. She'd done her homework, investigating the circumstances of Marcus's interview and the information he'd somehow obtained. What she discovered confirmed everything I'd suspected and more. "We take the integrity of our hiring process very seriously," she told me as we sat in her office, a corner space with windows overlooking the city. "After reviewing the situation, we've determined that Mr. Chen's interview was compromised by information he shouldn't have had access to." I nodded, maintaining my composure while internally celebrating. "We're prepared to offer you the position," she continued, "assuming you're still interested." Interested? I wanted to laugh out loud. This was everything I'd wanted and more. Not only was I getting my dream job, but I was getting it because Sarah's betrayal had backfired completely. "I'm very interested," I said. "When would you like me to start? How about Monday?" That weekend I should have been celebrating. I should have been shopping for professional wardrobe additions, researching my new team, planning my first week at Pinnacle. Instead, I was fine-tuning my revenge plan. Sarah still didn't know I'd gotten the job. She was expecting me to be devastated, to come crying to her about another failed opportunity. She was probably preparing her consolation speech, practicing her fake sympathy. The thought of her disappointment when she learned the truth filled me with a dark satisfaction. But getting the job was just the first step. The real revenge was going to take time, patience, and careful planning. I spent the weekend researching Apex Solutions, Sarah's company. I learned about their client list, their recent projects, their financial situation. I discovered that they were struggling more than their public face suggested, losing clients to more innovative competitors. Sarah's job, while stable for now, wasn't as secure as she probably believed. More importantly, I learned about their relationship with Pinnacle. The two companies had worked together on several projects over the years, sometimes as partners, sometimes as competitors for the same clients. Pinnacle was the bigger, more prestigious firm, but Apex had carved out a niche in certain market segments. As Senior Marketing Director at Pinnacle, I would have significant influence over vendor selection and partnership decisions. I would have access to client lists, project timelines, and strategic information that could make or break smaller firms like Apex. Sarah had destroyed my trust, sabotaged my career, and betrayed our friendship. Now I was going to use everything I'd learned about strategic planning and market positioning to systematically dismantle her professional life. But first, I had to let her know I'd gotten the job. I wanted to see her face when she realized her betrayal had failed. Sunday evening, I called her again. "Sarah, I have some news." "Oh no," she said, her voice immediately shifting to concerned friend mode. "What happened? Did they call already?" "They did," I said, pausing for dramatic effect. "I got the job." The silence that followed was beautiful. I could picture her face, the shock and confusion and dawning horror as she realized what this meant. Marcus hadn't gotten the position. All her scheming and betrayal had been for nothing. That's wonderful," she finally managed, but her voice cracked on the last word. "I'm so happy for you." "Thank you," I said sweetly. "I start Monday. I can't wait to begin this new chapter of my career." We talked for a few more minutes, but I could tell she was distracted, probably trying to figure out how her foolproof plan had gone so wrong. She'd underestimated me, assumed I was too naive to fight back, too trusting to see through her deception. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Monday morning, I walked into Pinnacle Creative Solutions as their new senior marketing director. The same building that had intimidated me 2 weeks earlier now felt like home. The same elevator that had carried me to disappointment now lifted me toward my future. My new office was everything I'd dreamed of and more. Corner location, floor-to-ceiling windows, enough space for a proper conference table, and a sitting area for informal meetings. My name was already on the door, etched in elegant lettering on a brass nameplate. Maria Rodriguez stopped by around noon to check on how I was settling in. "How are you feeling?" she asked, settling into one of my new chairs. "Grateful," I said honestly, "and determined to prove that you made the right choice." "I have no doubt about that," she said. "I also wanted to let you know that we'll be reviewing our vendor relationships over the next few months. As Senior Marketing Director, you'll have significant input on which partnerships we maintain and which new ones we pursue." My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'm looking forward to that process. I think it's important to regularly evaluate whether our partnerships are serving our clients' best interests." "Exactly. I'll be interested in your perspective on some of our current vendors. Apex Solutions, for example. We've worked with them intermittently, but I'm not sure they're the right fit for our evolving needs." I nodded thoughtfully, as if I were considering this information for the first time. Inside, I was rejoicing. Sarah's company was already on shaky ground with Pinnacle, and now I was in a position to influence their fate. "I'll definitely include them in my review," I said. "A thorough evaluation of all our partnerships will be one of my first priorities." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of new projects, team meetings, and strategic planning sessions. I threw myself into my work with an intensity that surprised even me. Part of it was genuine excitement about my new role, but part of it was also laying the groundwork for Sarah's downfall. I learned everything I could about Pinnacle's client relationships and project history. I reviewed past collaborations with Apex Solutions, documenting every instance where their work had been subpar or their timelines had slipped. I built relationships with key stakeholders, establishing myself as someone whose opinions carried weight. Most importantly, I waited. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and I was determined to make sure mine was absolutely frigid. 3 weeks into my new job, the perfect opportunity presented itself. Rodriguez called me into her office to discuss a major client who was looking for a marketing partner for a 6-month campaign worth nearly $500,000. Traditionally, we would have considered Apex Solutions for this type of project, she said, reviewing the client's requirements. "But I want your opinion on whether we should explore other options." I'd been preparing for this moment since my first day. I'd researched the client extensively, analyzed their needs, and identified several potential partners who would be better suited for the project than Apex. But more than that, I'd documented Apex's shortcomings in previous collaborations, building an airtight case for why they shouldn't be considered. "I think we should definitely explore other options," I said, sliding a folder across her desk. "I've done some analysis of Apex's past performance with us, and I have some concerns about their ability to deliver on a project of this scale." Rodriguez opened the folder and began reviewing my documentation. I'd been thorough, perhaps overly so. Every missed deadline, every budget overrun, every client complaint was cataloged and cross-referenced. It painted a picture of a company that was unreliable at best, incompetent at worst. "This is very thorough," Rodriguez said, flipping through the pages. "I wasn't aware of some of these issues. I think they may have been overlooked because the projects were smaller," I said diplomatically. "But when you aggregate the data, a pattern emerges." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Based on this analysis, I think you're right to suggest we look elsewhere. Do you have any recommendations for alternative partners?" I did, of course. I'd spent hours researching firms that would be perfect for this project, companies that would deliver exceptional results and make Pinnacle look good by association, firms that weren't Apex Solutions. "I have several recommendations," I said, producing another folder. "These companies all have strong track records in this type of campaign, and their pricing is competitive." Over the next hour, we discussed the potential partners and their qualifications. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that Apex Solutions wouldn't even be invited to bid on the project. A project that would have been a lifeline for a struggling company, a project that could have kept Sarah employed and financially stable. Instead, it was going to one of their competitors. That evening, I allowed myself a glass of wine and a moment of pure satisfaction. Sarah had tried to destroy my career, and now I was systematically dismantling hers. The beauty of it was that she had no idea what was happening. To her, this was just another lost opportunity, another client that went to a competitor. She couldn't see the pattern yet, couldn't trace the losses back to me. But she would. Eventually she would. I was just getting started. Over the next 2 months, I had similar conversations about 3 other potential Apex projects. Each time I presented thorough professional analysis that demonstrated why other partners would be better choices. Each time my recommendations were accepted without question. My reputation at Pinnacle was growing. Rodriguez and other executives praised my strategic thinking and attention to detail. My team respected my leadership and trusted my judgment. I was exactly where I'd always wanted to be, successful, respected, and in control of my professional destiny. Meanwhile, Sarah's world was slowly crumbling. Through mutual acquaintances and social media, I tracked the gradual deterioration of her situation. Apex was losing clients, laying off staff, reducing salaries. Sarah's confident posts about work achievements became less frequent, replaced by generic motivational quotes and desperate networking attempts. She still had no idea I was behind any of it. The final blow came in month 4 of my tenure at Pinnacle. Rodriguez called me into her office for what I thought was a routine check-in, but the conversation quickly took an unexpected turn. "We've been incredibly impressed with your work," she said, settling behind her desk with a cup of coffee. "Your strategic thinking and analytical skills have already had a significant impact on our operations." I thanked her, wondering where this was leading. "We're restructuring our vendor management process," she continued. "We want to centralize decision-making and ensure consistency across all our partnerships. We're creating a new position, Director of Strategic Partnerships, and we'd like you to take it on in addition to your current responsibilities." My heart started racing, but I kept my expression professionally interested. "That sounds like an exciting opportunity. What would the role entail?" "You'd have oversight of all our external partnerships, marketing vendors, creative agencies, consultants, everyone. You'd make recommendations on which relationships to maintain, which to develop, and which to terminate." The irony was almost too perfect. Sarah had tried to sabotage my career, and as a result, I was being promoted to a position where I could completely control hers. "I'm very interested," I said. "When would this start?" "Immediately. We're sending termination letters to several underperforming vendors this week, and we want you to oversee the transition." I knew without asking that Apex Solutions would be on that list. All my careful documentation, all my strategic recommendations had led to this moment. "I'd be honored to take on this responsibility," I said. That afternoon, I drafted the letter that would end Sarah's company's relationship with Pinnacle. I made it professional but final, citing performance issues and strategic misalignment. I signed it with my name and title, knowing that Sarah would see exactly who had made the decision. The letter was delivered the next morning. I waited until afternoon before checking Sarah's social media, wanting to give her time to receive and process the news. Her latest post was a single word: devastated. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt some remorse for the role I'd played in her professional downfall. But all I felt was a cold, calculating satisfaction. She'd tried to destroy me, and I'd turned her weapon against her. The game was far from over. That evening, my phone rang. It was Sarah, and for the first time in months, her voice was shaking. "Did you know?" she asked without preamble. "About Pinnacle dropping Apex?" I paused as if considering the question. "I may have heard something about vendor relationships being reviewed." "Why?" "They terminated our contract. After 3 years of partnership, they just ended it. The letter came from you." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, injecting just the right amount of professional sympathy into my voice. "These decisions are never easy, but sometimes they're necessary for business reasons." "Business reasons?" she repeated, and I could hear the suspicion in her voice. "This is going to cost me my job, maybe my career." "I'm sure you'll land on your feet," I said. "You're talented and experienced. Something will work out." But we both knew that wasn't true. In our industry, losing a major client like Pinnacle was a career killer. Word would spread, other companies would question Apex's competence, and the downward spiral would accelerate. "I need to ask you something," Sarah said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Did you do this on purpose? Are you punishing me for something?" For a brief moment, I considered telling her the truth. I imagined her reaction when she learned that I'd known about her betrayal for months, that every coffee date and friendly conversation had been part of a larger plan. I imagined her shock when she realized the full extent of what I'd done. But that moment of revelation would come later, when her destruction was complete and irreversible. "I don't know what you mean," I said instead. "My job is to evaluate partnerships based on performance and strategic value. Personal relationships don't factor into business decisions." The lie was smooth and professional, exactly the kind of corporate doublespeak that Sarah would understand. It was also a subtle threat, a reminder that I was now in a position of power while she was not. "Right," she said, and I could hear her trying to pull herself together. "Of course. I'm sorry for implying otherwise. This is a difficult time." "I understand," I said. "These transitions are never easy for anyone involved." After we hung up, I poured myself another glass of wine and reflected on how perfectly everything was falling into place. Sarah was beginning to suspect that her downfall wasn't entirely accidental, but she couldn't prove anything. She was smart enough to recognize a pattern, but powerless to stop it. The best part was that I was just getting started. Over the next few weeks, I leveraged my new position to maximum effect. I reached out to contacts at other companies, subtly mentioning Apex's performance issues and suggesting they might want to reconsider any ongoing relationships. I shared my analysis of vendor performance metrics at industry conferences, making sure that Apex's shortcomings were highlighted without directly naming them. In the corporate world, reputation is everything. Once doubt creeps in, it spreads like a virus, infecting every relationship and opportunity. I was patient, methodical, and ruthless in my execution. Sarah's LinkedIn profile began showing signs of desperation. Her posts about exciting new opportunities and embracing change fooled no one. She was posting more frequently, trying to maintain visibility while her professional world collapsed around her. Meanwhile, my own career was soaring. The Director of Strategic Partnerships role came with a significant salary increase and even more autonomy. Rodriguez praised my work at every opportunity, and I was invited to present at the company's quarterly board meeting. I was living the professional life I'd always dreamed of, and it was even sweeter because it had been built on the foundation of Sarah's betrayal. But I wasn't satisfied yet. Sarah was losing clients and facing potential unemployment, but she still didn't know why. She suspected something, but she couldn't prove it, couldn't connect the dots between her betrayal and her downfall. I wanted her to know. I needed her to understand that actions have consequences, that betraying someone's trust comes with a price. The opportunity for revelation came sooner than I expected. It was a Friday evening, and I was working late in my office, reviewing proposals from potential new partners. The Pinnacle building was mostly empty, just a few dedicated souls grinding away at projects that couldn't wait until Monday. I was deep in a comparative analysis when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number, but the message made my blood freeze. "I know what you did." I stared at the screen, my heart rate spiking. The message was simple, direct, and absolutely terrifying. Someone knew about my revenge campaign against Sarah. Someone had connected the dots. A second message appeared. "Meet me in the lobby. Now." I didn't recognize the number, but I had a sinking feeling I knew who it was. With shaking hands, I saved my work, grabbed my purse, and headed for the elevator. The lobby was dimly lit, most of the overhead lights turned off for the evening. A few security guards manned the front desk, but otherwise the space was empty, except for a lone figure sitting in one of the leather chairs near the window wall. Sarah. She looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, her expensive blazer wrinkled as if she'd slept in it. When she looked up at me, her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. "Hello, old friend," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I approached slowly, my mind racing. How much did she know? How had she figured it out? And most importantly, what was she planning to do with the information? "Sarah," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "This is unexpected." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Unexpected. That's one way to put it. I prefer overdue." We sat in silence for a moment, studying each other like chess masters trying to anticipate the next move. The lobby felt enormous around us, our conversation taking place in a bubble of tension and barely contained hostility. "I have to admit," Sarah finally said, "you played this perfectly." I never suspected a thing until it was too late. So she did know. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "Please," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "We're past that now. I know you've been systematically destroying my career for months. I know you were behind Pinnacle dropping Apex. I know you've been spreading poison about my company throughout the industry." I remained silent, neither confirming nor denying her accusations. "The question is," she continued, "why? What did I ever do to deserve this?" And there it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. The opportunity to reveal everything, to show her the text messages, to make her understand the scope of her betrayal and the depth of my response. But looking at her broken figure, her desperate eyes, her complete lack of awareness about why this was happening, I realized something that surprised me. I wanted her to figure it out herself. "I think you know," I said quietly. She shook her head. "I really don't. We've been friends for years. I've always supported you, always been there for you. I don't understand why you would want to hurt me like this." The audacity of her statement was breathtaking. She genuinely seemed to believe that she'd been a loyal friend, that my actions had come out of nowhere. The cognitive dissonance was almost impressive. "Think harder," I said. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes searching my face for clues. "Is this about Marcus? About the Pinnacle job? You got the position anyway, so I don't understand why you'd—" She stopped mid-sentence, and I saw the exact moment when understanding dawned in her eyes. The color drained from her face, and her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, God," she whispered. "You know, finally." "I know," I confirmed. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's breathing became shallow and rapid, her eyes wide with shock and dawning horror. She was reliving every interaction we'd had since the Pinnacle interview, understanding for the first time that I'd been playing a completely different game than she'd realized. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since the day of the interview. Marcus accidentally sent me a text meant for someone else. A text thanking you for the inside information." Sarah closed her eyes, her shoulders sagging with defeat. "I can explain—" "Can you?" I interrupted. "Can you explain why my best friend decided to sabotage the most important opportunity of my career? Can you explain why you helped my competition while pretending to support me? Can you explain why you looked me in the eye and lied to me over and over again?" She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was jealous," she whispered. "I was so jealous I couldn't stand it." "Of what?" "Of everything," she said, her voice breaking. "Your talent, your opportunities, your potential. I've been watching you succeed while I stayed stuck in the same mediocre job, and I snapped. The confession should have felt like vindication, but instead it felt hollow. All the pain, all the planning, all the careful orchestration of her downfall, and in the end, her motivation was something as simple and pathetic as jealousy. "So you decided to destroy me instead of improving yourself," I said. "I didn't think it through," she said desperately. "I just wanted to level the playing field. I thought if you didn't get the Pinnacle job, maybe we'd be on equal footing again. I never imagined it would backfire like this. What did you think would happen? That I'd never find out? That we'd go back to being friends while you'd sabotaged my entire career?" She had no answer for that, and we both knew why. She hadn't thought it through because she'd never expected to face consequences. She'd assumed she was smarter than me, more cunning, better at playing the game. She'd been wrong. "I'm sorry," she said, the words barely audible. "I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that I regret it every day." I studied her tear-stained face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but she seemed genuinely broken, genuinely remorseful. The friend I'd once loved was still there, buried under layers of jealousy and poor decisions. For a moment, I wavered. Maybe I'd gone too far. Maybe destroying her career was excessive revenge for what she'd done. Maybe it was time to call a truce, to find a way forward that didn't involve complete mutual destruction. Then I remembered the text messages, the careful planning, the way she'd smiled while helping me prepare for an interview she'd already sabotaged. "Your apology doesn't change anything," I said. "You made your choice and now you have to live with the consequences." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know. I wanted you to know that I understand why you did this. I deserved it." She stood up slowly, like an old woman carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "For what it's worth," she said, "you were brilliant. I never saw it coming until it was too late. You're everything I always knew you could be, and I'm sorry I tried to stop you from becoming it." She walked toward the exit, her heels clicking hollowly against the marble floor. At the door, she turned back one last time. "Goodbye, Sarah," she said. "I hope you get everything you want in life. You've certainly earned it." And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the dim lobby with the weight of what I'd accomplished. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. Sarah had confessed everything, acknowledged her betrayal, and accepted responsibility for her downfall. My revenge was complete and devastating. Instead, I felt empty. I sat in that lobby for another 20 minutes after Sarah left, processing everything that had just happened. The security guards glanced at me occasionally, probably wondering why I was still there so late, but they didn't approach. I was grateful for the solitude, for the chance to untangle the complex web of emotions that Sarah's confession had unleashed. The empty feeling surprised me. I'd spent months planning her destruction, savoring each small victory, building toward this moment of complete vindication. Now that it had arrived, I felt hollow rather than triumphant. Perhaps it was because seeing her broken and defeated had reminded me of the friend she'd once been, before jealousy and betrayal had poisoned everything between us. Or perhaps it was because I was finally forced to confront what I'd become in pursuit of my revenge. I'd been methodical, calculating, and utterly ruthless in dismantling Sarah's career. I'd used my position of power to systematically destroy someone who had once been the most important person in my life. I'd become exactly the kind of person I'd always claimed to despise, someone who used professional influence for personal vendettas. The thought should have disturbed me more than it did. I finally stood up and walked back to the elevator, my heels echoing in the empty lobby just as Sarah's had minutes before. But where her footsteps had sounded defeated, hollow, mine rang with authority and confidence. I was going back up to my office, to my corner view, to my successful career that I'd built on the foundation of her betrayal. The parallel wasn't lost on me. Back in my office, I poured myself a scotch from the bottle I kept in my desk drawer, a gift from Rodriguez after I'd successfully negotiated a particularly difficult client contract. I stood at my floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights, reflecting on how dramatically my life had changed in less than 2 years. 24 months ago, I'd been struggling to make ends meet in a cramped studio apartment, desperately applying for jobs that barely paid enough to cover my student loans. Tonight, I was standing in a corner office at one of the most prestigious marketing firms in the city, holding a position that paid more than I'd ever dreamed possible. I'd gone from victim to victor, from prey to predator, from the betrayed to the betrayer. The scotch burned going down, but it helped clarify my thoughts. Sarah's destruction was complete, but it was only one part of a larger transformation that had been taking place within me. The naive, trusting person who had walked into that interview 18 months ago was gone, replaced by someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. I thought about Marcus Chen, the man whose accidental text message had started this entire chain of events. What had happened to him after he'd lost the pinnacle job? I'd been so focused on Sarah that I'd never bothered to track his fate. A few minutes of internet searching gave me my answer. He'd taken a position at a smaller firm for significantly less money, his career trajectory permanently altered by his association with the scandal. The thought brought me no satisfaction. Marcus had been a tool, a pawn in Sarah's game. His real crime had been accepting inside information, not orchestrating the betrayal. But in the corporate world, association with unethical behavior was often as damaging as the behavior itself. He'd paid a price for Sarah's jealousy just as I had, albeit a different one. I finished my scotch and gathered my things to leave. Tomorrow was Saturday, and I had plans to view apartments in the upscale neighborhood I'd been dreaming about for years. My promotion and salary increase had finally made it financially feasible to live the life I'd always wanted. Another victory built on Sarah's defeat. The weekend passed in a blur of apartment viewings, furniture shopping, and strategic planning for the coming week. I'd scheduled meetings with 3 potential new vendor partners, each one carefully selected to replace services that firms like Apex had previously provided. The old Sarah would have felt guilty about leveraging her professional network to exclude her former friend from opportunities. The new Sarah, the one who'd been forged in the fires of betrayal and revenge, felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Monday morning brought an unexpected development. I arrived at my office to find an email from Rodriguez marked Urgent Confidential. The subject line made my pulse quicken. Vendor investigation results. I opened the message with trembling fingers, though I tried to tell myself there was nothing to worry about. My campaign against Apex had been subtle, professional, and well documented. Every decision I'd made could be justified on legitimate business grounds. Sarah, the email began, I need to see you in my office immediately upon your arrival. We've received some concerning information about potential conflicts of interest in our vendor management processes. Please bring any documentation related to the Apex Solutions termination. My blood went cold. Concerning information about conflicts of interest. There was only one person who could have provided that information, only one person who knew enough about my motivations to raise questions about my professional conduct. Sarah had gone nuclear. I spent the elevator ride to Rodriguez's office preparing my defense. I'd documented everything meticulously, built airtight business cases for every decision I'd made. Even if Sarah had told them about our personal history, she couldn't prove that my professional recommendations were anything other than sound business judgment. Rodriguez's assistant waved me directly into her office. Rodriguez was seated behind her desk, her expression unreadable. Across from her sat a man I didn't recognize. Tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit that screamed, corporate attorney. Sarah, please sit down, Rodriguez said, gesturing to the chair next to the stranger. This is James Morrison from our legal department. Legal department. This was worse than I'd thought. Ms. Parker, Morrison said, his voice professionally neutral. We've received some allegations about potential conflicts of interest in your management of vendor relationships. Specifically, allegations that you may have used personal grievances to influence business decisions. I kept my expression calm, professional. I'm not sure what you mean. All of my vendor recommendations have been based on objective performance metrics and strategic business considerations. Rodriguez leaned forward. We understand that you had a personal relationship with Sarah Chen from Apex Solutions. Is that correct? Sarah Chen. So she'd reverted to her maiden name, probably part of an effort to distance herself professionally from the disaster her career had become. The detail struck me as pathetically desperate. We were friends in college and maintained a social relationship afterward, I said carefully, but I've always maintained strict professional boundaries. My recommendations regarding Apex were based entirely on their performance history with Pinnacle. Morrison opened a folder and slid several documents across the desk. We've received copies of text messages and email conversations that suggest your termination of Apex's contract may have been motivated by personal factors rather than business considerations. My heart sank as I recognized the documents. Screenshots of my research into Apex, notes I'd made about Sarah's career, even printouts of her social media posts that I'd used to track her professional decline. She'd been more thorough in her investigation of my revenge campaign than I'd given her credit for. Where did you get these? I asked, stalling for time while I tried to figure out how to explain the evidence. That's not relevant, Morrison said. What's relevant is whether these documents suggest that you abused your position to settle personal scores. I looked at the papers spread across Rodriguez's desk, my carefully constructed professional facade crumbling. The evidence was damning, not because it proved I'd made bad business decisions, but because it revealed the personal motivation behind those decisions. Even if every recommendation I'd made was objectively correct, the documentation showed that my process had been compromised by personal animus. I'd like to explain, I said. Rodriguez nodded. Please do. I took a deep breath and made a calculated decision. If I was going down, I was going to control the narrative. Sarah Chen betrayed my trust in a significant way that nearly derailed my career, I began. She provided inside information to a competitor during my interview process with Pinnacle, information that could have cost me this position. Morrison made a note. And you felt that justified using your position here to retaliate against her company? I felt that it informed my assessment of her integrity and the integrity of the organization she worked for, I said. Someone who would betray a personal friend for professional gain isn't someone I wanted Pinnacle to do business with. It was semantic maneuvering, and we all knew it. But it was also not entirely untrue. Sarah's betrayal had revealed something fundamental about her character, something that was legitimately relevant to business relationships. Rodriguez studied me for a long moment. Sarah, I need to ask you directly. Did you terminate Apex's contract because of their performance, or because of your personal issues with Sarah Chen? The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. I could lie, claim that the personal issues were irrelevant to my professional judgment, but the evidence suggested otherwise, and lying would only make things worse. Both, I said finally. My personal experience with Sarah Chen gave me insight into the ethical standards at Apex Solutions. That insight informed my professional assessment of whether they were the right partner for Pinnacle. Morrison and Rodriguez exchanged glances. I could see them weighing my response, trying to determine whether my reasoning was legitimate or merely sophisticated rationalization. I understand your perspective, Rodriguez said slowly, but I'm concerned about the appearance of impropriety. Our vendor selection process needs to be above reproach. I agree completely, I said, and I believe it has been. Every decision I've made can be justified on business grounds. That may be true, Morrison interjected, but the documentation suggests your decision-making process was compromised by personal considerations. That's problematic from a legal and ethical standpoint. I felt the walls closing in around me. Sarah's final gambit was more sophisticated than I'd expected. She couldn't undo the damage I'd done to her career, but she could ensure that my victory came at a cost. She could force me to face consequences for my actions, just as she was facing consequences for hers. What are you proposing? I asked. Rodriguez sighed. We're going to conduct a full review of all vendor decisions you've made since joining Pinnacle. We'll also be implementing new oversight procedures to ensure that personal relationships don't influence business decisions in the future. And in the meantime? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. In the meantime, you'll be suspended pending the completion of our investigation, Morrison said. You'll continue to receive salary, but you won't have access to the building or company systems. Suspended. The word hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd achieved, everything I'd built, I was being suspended because Sarah had decided to burn everything down rather than accept her defeat gracefully. I see, I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building inside me. How long will this investigation take? 2 to 3 weeks, Rodriguez said. Possibly longer depending on what we find. I nodded, stood up, and gathered the personal items from Rodriguez's desk. I'll await your findings. The walk back to my office to collect my personal belongings was the longest of my life. Word of my suspension had somehow already leaked, probably from Morrison's assistant or someone else in the legal department. I could feel eyes on me as I moved through the hallways, whispered conversations falling silent as I passed. My assistant Jennifer was waiting in my office when I arrived. Her expression was sympathetic but cautious, the look of someone trying to distance themselves from a colleague who might be toxic. I'm sorry this is happening, she said quietly. Is there anything I can do? Just pack up my personal items, I said. I'll have them sent to my apartment. She nodded and began carefully placing my belongings in boxes. The framed photos, the awards, the expensive scotch, all the trappings of success that now felt hollow and meaningless. As I watched Jennifer pack my professional life into cardboard boxes, I realized that Sarah had played her final card perfectly. She couldn't restore her own career or undo the damage I'd caused, but she could ensure that my victory was Pyrrhic. She could force me to confront the cost of my revenge, to face the consequences of becoming the kind of person who would systematically destroy someone else's life. The security guard who escorted me from the building was professional but firm. I handed over my badge and key card, officially severing my connection to Pinnacle until the investigation was complete. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was leaving the same building where I'd achieved my greatest professional triumph under circumstances that mirrored Sarah's departure from Apex. That evening, I sat in my expensive new apartment, the one I'd rented with money earned from the job I might now lose, and tried to process what had happened. Sarah's counterattack had been brilliant in its simplicity. She'd used my own thoroughness against me, turning my meticulous documentation into evidence of my compromised judgment. But more than that, she'd forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding since our confrontation in the lobby. In my quest for revenge, I'd become someone I didn't recognize. I'd used my position of power to systematically destroy another person's livelihood, and I'd justified it by claiming moral superiority. I'd become the very thing I'd accused Sarah of being, someone who put personal interests above professional ethics. The realization should have been devastating. Instead, it was oddly liberating. For months, I'd been carrying the weight of my elaborate revenge campaign, the constant strategizing and manipulation and careful orchestration of Sarah's downfall. Now that the game was over, now that we'd both played our final cards, I could finally stop pretending that I was the innocent victim in this story. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Sarah was probably celebrating her small victory, knowing that she'd managed to wound me even in defeat. Somewhere else, Rodriguez and Morrison were reviewing my case, trying to determine whether I was the kind of person Pinnacle wanted representing their company. 3 days into my suspension, I received an unexpected phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but I recognized the voice immediately. "Hello, Sarah. Marcus Chen, the man whose accidental text message had started this entire nightmare. I heard about your situation," he said without preamble. "I thought you might want to know the full story." I wasn't sure I wanted to hear whatever he had to say, but curiosity got the better of me. "What full story?" "About Sarah Chen and what really happened with the Pinnacle interview." My pulse quickened. "I'm listening." "Sarah approached me about 3 weeks before your interview," Marcus said. "She told me she had inside information about the position and that she'd share it in exchange for a favor." "What kind of favor?" "A recommendation for a position at my new company." She was already looking to leave Apex even then. The Pinnacle intelligence was her way of buying herself a ticket out. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Sarah hadn't sabotaged me out of jealousy or desperation. She'd done it as part of a calculated career move, trading my dreams for her own advancement. She never intended to stay at Apex. Marcus continued. She was using the Pinnacle situation to build relationships she could leverage later. I was just one of several people she was cultivating. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I found out she's been spreading stories about both of us," he said, painting herself as the victim of a corporate conspiracy. "I thought you should know what you're really dealing with." After Marcus hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Sarah's confession in the Pinnacle lobby had been carefully crafted theater, designed to make me feel guilty about my revenge while positioning herself as the remorseful friend who'd made a mistake. The truth was far more calculated and cold-blooded. She hadn't sabotaged me in a moment of jealous weakness. She'd done it as part of a strategic plan to advance her own career, a plan that had involved multiple people and multiple deceptions. My campaign of revenge hadn't been excessive. It had been proportionate to the depth of her betrayal. The next morning, I called Rodriguez's office and requested an emergency meeting. Her assistant was initially reluctant, but when I mentioned that I had new information relevant to the investigation, she agreed to squeeze me into Rodriguez's schedule that afternoon. I arrived at Pinnacle feeling strange about entering the building as a visitor rather than an employee. The security guard who checked my ID was the same one who'd escorted me out 3 days earlier. He gave me a sympathetic nod but didn't comment on the changed circumstances. Rodriguez received me in her office with professional courtesy but obvious wariness. Morrison was there as well, his legal pad ready for whatever bombshell I was about to drop. "I've received additional information about the situation with Apex Solutions," I began. "Information that I believe is relevant to your investigation." I told them about Marcus's call, about Sarah's calculated plan to trade inside information for career advancement, about the larger pattern of deception that went far beyond a single moment of jealous betrayal. Rodriguez listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me for a long moment. "This doesn't change the fact that you used personal information to influence business decisions," she said finally. "No," I agreed, "but it does provide context for those decisions." Sarah Chen wasn't just someone who'd hurt my feelings. She was someone who'd demonstrated a pattern of unethical behavior that made her unsuitable as a business partner. Morrison looked up from his notes. "You're arguing that your personal knowledge of her character was relevant to your professional assessment?" "I'm arguing that character is always relevant in business relationships," I said. Someone who would betray a personal friend for professional gain is someone who would betray a business partner for the same reasons. Rodriguez and Morrison exchanged glances, and I could see them reconsidering the narrative they'd constructed around my case. I wasn't just the vindictive executive who'd abused her position. I was also the victim of a sophisticated manipulation campaign who'd used her knowledge to protect her company from an unethical partner. "We'll need to verify this information," Rodriguez said. "And it doesn't completely resolve the ethical questions about your conduct." "I understand," I said. "But I hope it provides a more complete picture of the situation." The investigation took another 2 weeks. During that time, I received updates from Jennifer about the chaos my suspension had caused at Pinnacle. Several major projects were behind schedule, vendor relationships were in disarray, and Rodriguez was reportedly working 16-hour days trying to manage the strategic partnerships portfolio herself. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to punish me for abusing my position, Pinnacle had discovered just how valuable that position was and how difficult it was to replace me. My expertise and relationships weren't easily replicated, even by someone as capable as Rodriguez. The call came on a Friday afternoon. Rodriguez asked me to come in the following Monday for a final meeting about the investigation. Her tone was neutral, giving me no indication of what decision had been reached. I spent the weekend in a strange state of suspended animation, neither fully expecting to be fired nor confident that I'd be reinstated. The outcome would determine not just my immediate future, but the entire trajectory of my career. Word of the investigation had leaked into industry circles, and other companies would be watching to see how Pinnacle resolved the situation. Monday morning, I dressed carefully in my best suit, the same navy blue outfit I'd worn to my original Pinnacle interview nearly 2 years earlier. The symbolism felt appropriate as I prepared to learn whether my career would survive the consequences of my revenge campaign. Rodriguez's office looked exactly the same as it had 3 weeks earlier, but the dynamic felt completely different. Rodriguez seemed more relaxed, less guarded. Morrison was still there, but his expression was less severe. "Sarah," Rodriguez began, "we've completed our investigation and we've reached a decision about your status with the company." I held my breath, preparing for whatever came next. "The investigation confirmed that you did use personal information to influence business decisions," she continued. "However, it also confirmed that those decisions were objectively sound and that your personal knowledge of Sarah Chen's character was relevant to assessing Apex Solutions as a business partner." I felt a flicker of hope but remained silent. "We're reinstating you to your position," Rodriguez said, "but with some conditions." The relief was overwhelming, but I managed to keep my expression professional. "What conditions?" Morrison leaned forward. "First, you'll be required to complete ethics training focused on managing conflicts of interest. Second, all future vendor decisions will require approval from a committee rather than individual judgment. Third, you'll be on probation for 6 months. Any further ethical questions will result in immediate termination." They were reasonable conditions considering the circumstances. I was keeping my job, my salary, and my position, but with guardrails to prevent future conflicts of interest. "I accept those conditions," I said. "When can I start back?" "Today, if you're ready," Rodriguez said. "We have a backlog of decisions that need your attention." Walking back into my office that afternoon felt like returning from exile. Jennifer had kept everything exactly as I'd left it, and the stack of work waiting for my attention was both daunting and oddly comforting. I was back where I belonged, in the position I'd earned through talent and hard work, rather than manipulation and revenge. But something fundamental had changed. The naive trust I'd once placed in personal relationships was gone, replaced by a harder, more realistic understanding of human nature. The idealistic belief that talent and merit were always rewarded had been tempered by the knowledge that success often required strategic thinking and calculated risks. Over the following months, I threw myself into my work with renewed focus. The committee approval process for vendor decisions actually improved our outcomes, forcing me to build stronger business cases and consider perspectives I might have missed. The ethics training was surprisingly valuable, helping me develop better frameworks for separating personal and professional considerations. Most importantly, I stopped obsessing over Sarah's fate. Her attempt to destroy my career had failed, and continuing to monitor her situation would only validate the accusations about my compromised judgment. Whatever happened to her next was no longer my concern. But that didn't mean I was completely indifferent to her fate. Through industry contacts and social media, I occasionally heard updates about her situation. She'd landed a position at a small consulting firm, but at a significantly reduced salary and with minimal opportunities for advancement. Her reputation in our industry had been permanently damaged by the Pinnacle controversy, and she was unlikely to recover her previous status. The poetic justice was satisfying, but it no longer consumed me. I'd achieved everything I'd set out to accomplish: professional success, financial security, and appropriate consequences for Sarah's betrayal. The revenge had been complete and devastating, but it had also been costly in ways I was only beginning to understand. 6 months after my reinstatement, Rodriguez called me into her office for my probation review. The meeting was scheduled for late afternoon, after most of the office had emptied out, creating an atmosphere of intimacy and confidentiality. "Your performance since returning has been exceptional," she began. "The committee process has improved our vendor relationships, and your strategic thinking continues to drive significant value for our clients." I thanked her, waiting for the inevitable "but" that would qualify her praise. "I'm terminating your probation early," she said instead. "You've demonstrated that you've learned from the situation and that you're committed to maintaining the highest ethical standards." The relief was profound. After months of walking on eggshells, constantly second-guessing my decisions and motivations, I was finally free to operate without the specter of the investigation hanging over me. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate the opportunity to prove myself." "There's something else," Rodriguez continued. "We're creating a new position, Vice President of Strategic Development. It would involve expanding your current responsibilities to include business development and client relationship management. Are you interested?" A promotion, not just reinstatement, but advancement. After everything that had happened, Pinnacle was still investing in my future, still betting on my potential. "Very interested," I said. "The position comes with a significant salary increase and equity participation," she continued. "You'd be one of the youngest VPs in the company's history." That evening, I celebrated alone in my apartment with a bottle of champagne I'd been saving for a special occasion. The view from my windows had become familiar over the past year, but tonight it looked different somehow. The city lights seemed brighter, the future more promising. I thought about calling someone to share the news, but realized I had no one to call. My relationship with Sarah had obviously ended, and my focus on revenge had cost me other friendships. My romantic life had been virtually non-existent while I'd been consumed with orchestrating her downfall. Success, it turned out, could be lonely when achieved at the expense of personal relationships. The thought should have been more disturbing than it was. But sitting in my expensive apartment, drinking champagne to celebrate my promotion to vice president, I found that I didn't particularly mind the solitude. I'd learned to rely on myself, to trust my own judgment, to find satisfaction in professional achievement rather than personal validation. A year later, I was having lunch with a potential client when I saw her. Sarah was sitting at a table across the restaurant, looking older and more worn than I remembered. She was with 2 women I didn't recognize, both younger and more stylishly dressed, junior colleagues probably, or potential clients she was trying to impress. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded restaurant. For a moment, neither of us moved or reacted. Then Sarah gave me the slightest nod, not friendly, but acknowledging. A recognition of shared history and mutual understanding. I nodded back and returned to my conversation with the client, a major retail chain that was considering a 7-figure marketing campaign. The contract would be one of the largest in Pinnacle's history, and landing it would cement my reputation as one of the most successful executives in the industry. Sarah's presence in the restaurant felt like a reminder of how far I'd traveled from the person I'd been 2 years earlier. That person had been trusting, idealistic, and naive about the realities of professional relationships. She'd believed that talent and hard work were sufficient for success, that personal loyalty meant something in the business world. The person I'd become was harder, more strategic, more aware of the complex motivations that drove human behavior. She understood that success required not just talent, but also political acumen, strategic thinking, and the willingness to protect herself against those who would exploit her trust. I closed the retail deal 3 weeks later. The contract was worth $2.3 million and positioned Pinnacle as the preferred marketing partner for the client's expansion into international markets. Rodriguez personally congratulated me at the company-wide meeting where the deal was announced, praising my strategic vision and relationship-building skills. That evening, I received a LinkedIn message from an unexpected source. Sarah had sent me a brief note. "Congratulations on the retail contract. Well deserved." I stared at the message for several minutes, unsure how to respond or whether to respond at all. The olive branch was subtle but unmistakable, an acknowledgement of my success and perhaps an attempt to establish some form of détente between us. In the end, I decided not to reply. Some relationships, once broken, couldn't be repaired with professional courtesy and LinkedIn messages. We'd hurt each other too deeply, betrayed each other too completely to ever return to anything resembling friendship. But her message did serve a purpose. It reminded me that the chapter of my life defined by revenge and betrayal was finally closed. Sarah was no longer my enemy. She was simply someone I used to know, someone whose path had once intersected with mine in destructive and ultimately transformative ways. 2 years after the Pinnacle investigation, I was promoted again, this time to Senior Vice President with responsibility for the company's entire West Coast operations. The promotion required relocating to Los Angeles, a move that felt like the final step in leaving my old life behind. On my last day in the office, I cleaned out my desk and packed the personal items that had accumulated over 3 years of success and controversy. Among them was a newspaper clipping I'd saved from my first month at Pinnacle, an article about the importance of ethical leadership in corporate America. I'd kept the clipping as a reminder of the standards I'd aspired to when I first started at the company. Reading it again, I realized how much my understanding of ethics and leadership had evolved. The naive idealism of my early career had been replaced by a more nuanced understanding of the moral complexities of business relationships. I wasn't the same person who'd been betrayed by her best friend and set out on a campaign of systematic revenge. But I wasn't sure I wanted to be that person again either. That person had been trusting and optimistic, but also vulnerable and naive. The person I'd become was harder and more calculating, but also more successful and more resilient. The transformation had been costly, in relationships, in innocence, in the simple faith that people were fundamentally good. But it had also been necessary. The business world wasn't a place for naive idealists. It was a place for strategic thinkers who understood that success required both talent and toughness. As I drove away from Pinnacle's headquarters for the last time, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. An accidental text message had revealed a betrayal that had changed the entire course of my life. A carefully orchestrated revenge campaign had taught me lessons about power, strategy, and human nature that no business school could have provided. Sarah's betrayal had been the catalyst for everything that followed. My success at Pinnacle, my promotion to VP, my relocation to Los Angeles, my transformation from victim to victor. In trying to destroy my dreams, she'd inadvertently forced me to become stronger, smarter, and more resilient than I'd ever imagined possible. The irony was perfect and complete. Her jealousy had become the foundation of my success. Her betrayal had become my motivation. Her attempt to sabotage my career had instead launched me toward heights I might never have reached without her unwitting assistance. Los Angeles offered new challenges and new opportunities. I was tasked with building Pinnacle's West Coast presence from the ground up, establishing relationships with entertainment industry clients and technology companies that were foreign to my previous experience. It was exactly the kind of challenge I thrived on, complex, high stakes, and requiring the strategic thinking skills I'd developed over the past few years. My new office was in a gleaming tower in Century City, with panoramic views of the city and the Pacific Ocean beyond. The symbolism felt appropriate, a new view for a new chapter of my life, one defined by my own choices rather than reactions to other people's betrayals. 6 months into my Los Angeles tenure, I received an invitation to speak at a marketing conference in San Francisco. The topic was Strategic Leadership in Vendor Relationship Management, a subject I'd become something of an expert on, albeit through unconventional means. The conference was well attended, with executives from major corporations and boutique agencies. I delivered my presentation with confidence, sharing insights about building sustainable partnerships and managing conflicts of interest. The audience was engaged and responsive, asking thoughtful questions about the practical challenges of vendor management. During the networking reception afterward, a familiar face appeared in my peripheral vision. Sarah was standing near the bar, wearing a professional smile and holding a business card out to a potential contact. She looked better than she had in the restaurant a year earlier, more confident, more polished. Her career had apparently stabilized, even if it hadn't returned to its previous trajectory. She spotted me at the same moment I noticed her. For a few seconds, we stood frozen across the crowded reception hall, two former friends separated by years of betrayal and revenge. Then she walked over, her expression cautiously neutral. "Hello, Sarah," she said, extending her hand for a professional handshake. "Great presentation." "Thank you," I replied, shaking her hand briefly. "I didn't realize you were attending the conference." "I'm working with a startup that's trying to break into the entertainment marketing space," she said. "Still fighting the good fight, just on a smaller scale." The conversation was surreal. Two people who'd once been inseparable, who'd plotted each other's destruction, making small talk at a professional networking event. We were both playing roles, projecting successful professional personas, while carefully avoiding any reference to our shared history. "Well," I said after a few minutes of stilted conversation, "I should continue networking. Good luck with the startup." "Good luck in Los Angeles," she replied. "I'm sure you'll do great things there." As I walked away, I realized that the encounter had provided a sense of closure I hadn't known I needed. Sarah and I would never be friends again, would never recapture the closeness we'd once shared. But we could coexist in the same professional universe without the toxic animosity that had defined our relationship for so long. She'd found a way to rebuild her career, even if on a smaller scale than before. I'd found success beyond anything I'd originally dreamed of. We'd both survived the destruction we'd inflicted on each other, emerging changed but not broken. That evening, alone in my hotel room overlooking San Francisco Bay, I reflected on the strange trajectory that had brought me to this point. 5 years earlier, I'd been a struggling marketing coordinator, desperately applying for jobs and dreaming of breaking into the industry's upper levels. Today, I was a senior vice president at one of the most prestigious firms in the business, with responsibility for developing an entire regional market. The path between those 2 points had been marked by betrayal, revenge, professional triumph, and personal transformation. I'd learned lessons about human nature, corporate politics, and strategic thinking that would serve me for the rest of my career. I'd also learned lessons about the costs of success and the complexity of moral decision-making in competitive environments. Was I proud of everything I'd done in pursuit of my goals? Not entirely. The systematic destruction of Sarah's career had been effective, but not necessarily admirable. I'd used my position of power to settle personal scores, even if those scores had legitimate business implications. But was I sorry for the choices I'd made? That was a more complicated question. Sarah's betrayal had been calculated and devastating, designed to destroy my dreams for her own advancement. My response had been proportionate, strategic, and ultimately successful. I'd protected myself and achieved my goals while ensuring that actions had consequences. In the morally ambiguous world of corporate competition, perhaps that was the best outcome anyone could reasonably expect. The sun was setting over San Francisco Bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of the view from my Pinnacle office on the evening I'd first discovered Sarah's betrayal. That moment felt like a lifetime ago, belonging to a different person in a different world. Tomorrow, I would fly back to Los Angeles and continue building Pinnacle's West Coast operations. I would negotiate contracts, manage client relationships, and make strategic decisions that would impact the careers and livelihoods of dozens of people. I would do so with the hard-won wisdom that success requires not just talent and hard work, but also strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, and the ability to protect oneself in a competitive environment. I would also do so with the knowledge that every choice has consequences, that betrayal leaves scars on both the betrayer and the betrayed, and that the pursuit of revenge, while satisfying, comes with costs that aren't always apparent until long after the victory has been achieved. But perhaps most importantly, I would do so as someone who had learned to rely on herself, to trust her own judgment, and to find strength in solitude rather than validation in relationships that could be corrupted by jealousy, ambition, or simple human weakness. The naive young woman who had trusted her best friend with her deepest dreams was gone, transformed by betrayal into someone harder and more resilient. The transformation had been painful, but it had also been necessary. In a world where trust could be weaponized and friendship could be tactical, survival required adaptation. As I packed my belongings and prepared for the flight back to Los Angeles, I allowed myself one final moment of reflection on the journey that had brought me to this point. Sarah's betrayal had been the catalyst for everything that followed: my professional success, my personal transformation, my understanding of the complex dynamics that govern human relationships in competitive environments. She'd tried to destroy my dreams and instead had given me the motivation to exceed them. She'd attempted to sabotage my career and instead had taught me the strategic thinking skills that made me exceptionally successful. She'd betrayed my trust, and in doing so had forced me to develop the self-reliance and emotional resilience that now defined my approach to both business and life. The irony was perfect, complete, and deeply satisfying. In the end, the best revenge had been living well, better than I'd ever imagined possible, built on the foundation of lessons learned from betrayal and the strength developed through surviving it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new tests of the wisdom I'd gained through experience. But tonight, sitting in a hotel room overlooking the city where my transformation had begun, I was content with the knowledge that I'd not only survived betrayal, but thrived because of it. Sarah had tried to write the ending to my story, but I'd taken control of the pen, and the story I'd written was far better than anything she could have imagined or I could have originally planned. That, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.